let me answer that in two parts. If the rest of Europe were going to transfer $10 billion to Romania and do it in the following way: divide it by the number of people in the economy and just give, you know, 1/80 millionth or whatever to each person of the however big the transfer is, so that then every single individual just had a little bit more wealth and could go out and spend that wealth on something, well, then it's hard to see how Romania would be worse off. But that's not the way the money is going to come. The way the money is going to come is from the public sector in the rest of Europe and be given to the public sector here. And the public sector in Romania will not only not necessarily spend it in a way that is as beneficial as it could be, it might indeed spend it in ways which are downright harmful by continuing to implement policies which make the rest of the economy worse off. So I think the public sector is going to do a bad job spending the money. We should think about the spending, not just about sort of the source of the funds. Second part of that is, in terms of what Romania or any country should do, I think it's important not to focus entirely on outcomes. I think it's better to focus on the policies, one by one. Is each policy make sense? Is there compelling justification for all these different interventions? Okay, lots of different taxes, restrictions on who can become a plumber, permits that you need to go into this kind of business, and so on and so forth. And I think when you do the thoughtful analysis, you realize that the vast majority of that has no good justification. It clearly creates corruption and so on and so forth. And so what every country should be doing is stripping away all of those superfluous and counterproductive policies, regulations, and so on, and then let the savings and everything else be determined by that. That will just come as the natural benefit of getting rid of bad policies.
All right. Now, we have before us a legendary book, Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Mm-hmm. According to Weber, economic behaviors have an inherent ethical content. The spirit of capitalism is driven by certain moral principles, a certain moral orientation. Nowadays, some people argue. No, my first question is: if you think that the moral values or moral orientation that Max Weber talk about in this book are still present today in capitalist economies, some people argue that they have changed, that society has suffered a moral shift. And they argue that consumerism has replaced moderation, for instance, that the rate of savings has decreased. They argue that abnegation was replaced with the lust for entertainment, that individual responsibility was replaced by social responsibility, collective responsibility. And from here on, we can extend the discussion to all this issue related to moral hazard and socialization of investment and so on. So do you think this book is still relevant for today's discussion? Do you think moral issues, ethical issues are related with economics or not?
The short answer to your question is I don't know how to answer it because I don't know what morality and ethics are. I think that the way most people use morality and ethics in these kinds of discussions is as a shorthand for consequences. That is, if someone says killing is immoral, I think what they really are saying is if one person kills another person, clearly the person who was killed is worse off. There's no way to know that the person who did the killing is better off so enough to somehow make up for the fact that the person who's dead is clearly worse off, so that our presumption should be against allowing that to happen purely on consequential grounds. And indeed, if you think about society's attitudes and laws toward killing more generally, it becomes clear that we actually do make a cost-benefit analysis about killing rather than simply just some moral assertion, because we do tolerate killings in some instances. In self-defense is the obvious example. Ancillary deaths that occur in war is another example. Shooting of a suspect who's fleeing a scene by the police is still another example. Capital punishment for many people is still another example. So I think that what morality is a way that people assert a bunch of consequences rather than actually talking explicitly through all the consequences. In some settings, that's totally fine. Using that morality view as a shorthand is convenient, but in many cases, it's better to talk through all the consequences rather than talk just about morality, because it's so trivial for one person to say, I think it's immoral that people who happen to be lucky and born with a lot of talent end up having higher incomes than people who are unlucky. And someone else says, I think it's immoral that you take something away from me and give it to someone who's poorer just because they're poor, that you punish me for working hard. Those two views go in diametrically opposite directions from the perspective of policy. One says we should redistribute in the direction of egalitarianism. One says we shouldn't redistribute. How can you reconcile that unless we talk explicitly about the consequences of trying to redistribute? Okay? If we redistribute, do we in fact help the people to whom we redistribute? If you think that when we do that we create a culture of poverty and condemn people and their children to always live in poverty, then we're not necessarily even helping the people to whom we redistribute, or at least not over the long haul. Okay? If you think that we discourage effort when we redistribute and we make the overall economic pie really small, then we might be making most people worse off, okay, by virtue of redistributing, and therefore some of the premises in the egalitarian view, okay, are not right. By having that conversation, different people with very different moralities might actually be able to have a conversation and figure out, well, how much redistribution is a tolerable amount, is an acceptable compromise. If you just talk about it in terms of morality, they can never come to any agreement or any common understanding.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for answering all these questions.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.